So we talked last week about the repeal of net neutrality. Net neutrality has been repealed. The net neutrality, I call them internet freedom regulations that were put in place under President Obama, but the structure for which actually came from FCC Chairman Michael Powell during the Republican George W. Bush administration. We did not have these oppressive left-wing parameters for net neutrality. It was something that was actually developed over the last couple of administrations. That was repealed. We knew this was probably going to happen when Donald Trump initially appointed Ajit Pai, a former Verizon lobbyist, lawyer rather. What's the difference at this point, right? To be chairman of the FCC, not exactly draining the swamp. And we knew that overwhelmingly Americans were in favor of net neutrality. It was the internet service providers and the lobbyists that were really against it. And one of the things that we knew would be allowed if net neutrality were repealed is that internet service providers would be legally allowed to create fast and slow lanes on the internet. They'd be allowed to charge more for better access to certain portals or websites and services. And all along during this debate, internet service providers said, don't worry, we would never do those things. You can trust us. Look at our websites. We have pledges on our websites about what we will and won't do, even if net neutrality were repealed. Comcast, for example, had the following pledges and statements on their corporate website before the repeal of net neutrality started to be talked about. And you can verify what we're putting up on the screen for you by using the Wayback Machine online to look at older versions of web pages. Comcast won't block access to lawful content. Comcast won't throttle back the speed at which content comes to you. Comcast doesn't prioritize, not won't, doesn't prioritize internet traffic or create paid fast lanes, and then a couple of other provisions that are less relevant here. As soon as a repeal of net neutrality started to be discussed early in the Trump administration, all of a sudden, half of those pledges / statements were removed, and it was obvious what it was that Comcast intended to do. The new version of Comcast pledges or quotes on their website say, merely, we do not block, slow down, or discriminate against lawful content. We believe in full transparency in our customer policies. We are for sustainable and legally enforceable net neutrality protections for our customers. You'll notice that from this, and we can keep it up, gone is, we won't throttle back speed at which content comes to you. Gone is, Comcast doesn't prioritize internet traffic or create paid fast lanes. Note the language there to begin with was Comcast does not, rather than Comcast pledges never to. Sure, you didn't do that when it was written in the law that you weren't allowed to. But of course, any reasonable person knows that Comcast and other internet service providers have obviously been planning to bail on the principles of net neutrality as soon as legally possible, which is now. And I actually saw people commenting online, okay, if you don't like Comcast's new policy, use a different internet service provider if you don't like that one. Most people have no choice, right? This is fundamentally a monopolistic market where most people live in places where you don't have a choice. You have one provider. This is going to be a disaster. Major protests are planned, but will that do anything? And I know people get mad at me, Pat, every time I say this version of resistance or that version of resistance won't do anything. David, you're deflating these activist movements. I'm not trying to deflate them, but I also am trying to think pragmatically about what will and won't change this. I believe that this is an issue of voting. That's the way to change this. You've got to vote them out.
Yeah, I mean, some on the right are now giving lip service to protecting net neutrality. We had that interview a few weeks ago with Andrew Torres on the topic.
That's right.
There is a path forward here. It's just not through the FCC.
And it's also not through anybody who will be in the FCC when Donald Trump is president of the United States. So voting is the path forward here. And I actually do get, people can have reasonable disagreements about abortion, right? Like, I don't agree with the anti-choice movement, but I understand, based on what they consider to be important moral and ethical values, how they might come away being against abortion being legal. I get that. When it comes to net neutrality, there's no real reason to be against it unless you've just completely fallen for the talking points of the internet service providers and their lobbyists.
Yeah, and with many of the big issues of the day, like, say, abortion or gay marriage, you may see like a 50-50 split or a 60-40 split among the
Sure.
population. Here it's an 80-20 split. This should not be a contest.
All you've got is the people that are either for personal reasons, right? They might just have a vested interest in getting rid of net neutrality, maybe because of their job or whatever. Those suffering from such significant cognitive dissonance that they just believe whatever Ajit Pai and Comcast say, and I don't know why you would. These are some of the worst ranked companies when it comes to customer satisfaction. Why would you ever take their word for it? Or it's just, your Republican senator or congressman said it, so you're going with it.
Or they don't understand the issue, which
That's
we're seeing
another
as
one,
well.
yeah. Because when you ask people, are you for or against net neutrality? And then you ask them, are you for or against XY provision of net neutrality? Overwhelmingly, the provisions get way higher favorability ratings than net neutrality at large. It's really bad. And I believe that all activism in favor of net neutrality is good, but I think the path forward to really fixing this is voting them out. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Quick break, back after this. Support for today's program comes from Health IQ, who believes that the best way to improve the health of the world is to celebrate the health conscious through social and financial rewards. So what they do is use science and data to get you lower rates on life insurance if you're a health conscious person. This includes runners and cyclists and strength trainers and people who eat healthy. 56% of Health IQ customers save between 4 and 33% on life insurance. And these are exclusive savings to Health IQ. It's sort of like saving money on your car insurance for being a good driver. Health IQ gets you lower rates on life insurance for living a health conscious lifestyle. After all, physically active people have a 34% lower risk of all-cause mortality and a 56% lower risk of heart disease. To see if you qualify, get a free quote today at healthiq.com/Pakman, or mention the promo code Pakman, that's PAKMAN, when you talk to a Health IQ agent. That's healthiq.com/PAKMAN to get your free quote.